Hi. Hi, welcome back, everyone. My name is Dr. Sheri Gibson.
And I'm Dr. Regina Lewis.
And we are here again for another, hopefully a great podcast, a wonderful discussion. And all of this, again, to remind you all out there, has been made available through the Connecticut State Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program with generous funding from the CARES Act.
Absolutely. This is going to be really exciting. And with our backgrounds, my background is in intercultural communication, communication psychology, and your background?
Right, is in aging. I'm a geropsychologist, meaning that I work with older adults and aging families, and I've done a lot of work in long-term care. So I think the two of us have just really had a wonderful discussion throughout this series.
Absolutely. And I believe that taking your expertise and then matching it with mine, really thinking about cultural responsiveness. And when we think about being culturally responsive, we have to not look at a person as a human, just as a human, that they have layers. Every single person does. So we have to meet people where they are.
Right.
And so we have to start thinking about culture. Culture is people's values, beliefs, ideology, spirituality. All of these things play a piece in their care. So we have to consider more than just the ailment itself.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going.
Yes, we are. And I think this is another wonderful opportunity for maybe you could remind our audience that when we think of culture, it's not just race.
Absolutely.
Can you say more about that?
Absolutely. So when we think about culture, a lot of times we do think about race, but there's so much more to it. I mean, there are experiences that if you are of a particular race, and understand that race is socially constructed. And so you may agree and say, yes, like I might say, I'm African American or I'm Black, and other people see me as such. However, I might not consider myself African American, but other people do. Mm-hmm. And so I need to understand, what does it mean to be African American in our society?
Right.
And because of that, then there is specific, experiences for me. Yes. In this society, for a Hispanic person, for an Asian person, for a person who is from European descent, all of these different areas. Mm-hmm. So that's the race part. But outside of that, when you start thinking about culture, it's the way that we do things.
Right.
It is our thoughts and beliefs. So we may be exposed to the same thing. So Sheri, you and I might be exposed to the exact same thing, but it's the experience that we have that starts to differentiate, and then it starts to solidify our belief system.
Right.
So our belief system is directly connected to our experiences. Mm-hmm. And from that, it builds our value systems and our thoughts. How we think about each other, about different situations. So when we start thinking about those who are aging and those who are caring for those who are aging, we too have our thoughts.
Right.
And it could be very different. You might say to me, oh, absolutely, I'm going to get the vaccine. And I'm thinking in my head, well, wait, there's a lot of other concerns that I have. I mean, when I look in the news, I'm finding information that's shocking, and it starts to scare me. Yes. And so I'm not sure if I should be getting the vaccine, even though we've been exposed to similar situations.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for making that distinction, because I think what that points to is what I always learned, even from early back in graduate school, that we fall within a matrix. Yes. Thinking about culture as a matrix. So not only does that embody our socially construed race,
right,
but also where we are in our cohort, what we grew up in. I'm Generation X.
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Yes.
I just learned my husband is a baby boomer, and it's hard for me to think about him in that way.
Right.
Because I have a schema or belief system of what a baby boomer looks like.
Absolutely.
And we also fall into our socioeconomic status.
Yes.
And what part of the country we're raised in.
Absolutely.
So all of those things makes up this matrix that is
It does.
culture, right?
It does. I mean, add to that our educational level.
Right.
You know, who do we connect with? Who do we see around us, and who are those who are the authority figures to provide information?
Oh, and that's a beautiful segue, as you would do, a beautiful segue in today's topic. And that is of media sensationalism.
Yes.
And, you know, Regina, you and I came up with this topic because we're so aware of how much the media influences those beliefs.
Absolutely.
Right?
I want to say this, Sheri. So there's something, it's a theory called the agenda setting function. And in the agenda setting function, it's saying that the media provides the news and they're driven by what the people want. But at the same time, people are driven by what the media puts out.
What a cycle, right?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
What a cycle. And we can get caught up in that so easily.
Yes.
And what we know is when we're caught up in that cycle, that it can lead to psychological distress.
Right.
How much exposure we're allowing ourselves in the media to have in the media, what kinds of media we're paying attention to,
Right.
the amount and the frequency of our watching,
Right.
can have a psychological impact on us and can lead to those things that we've talked about earlier in this podcast series, which is fear and anxiety, for example.
Right.
So one of the things that we know is that seeking information has purpose.
Right.
And we have to be good consumers, to be effective in our own lives. We have to seek out that information. But it's really important to know how we're seeking it out, what information we're seeking, and when we do that, also knowing that when we seek information, that can help reduce that anxiety, because information's power.
Right.
And there's a lot of truth in that statement for us. We have to have that power in order to feel that we've got mastery in our lives.
Absolutely.
And we can get caught up in the cycle too. There's got to be a balance, right?
Yes, it does. You know, when I think about looking at the media, and, you know, what is the media? It's not just television, it's radio, it's the newspaper, it's online, it's the internet. It's just everything, and it's everywhere.
Everywhere.
And people have become overwhelmed. If we stop and think about how we watched what happened to George Floyd, this was devastating. People lost, it was almost as if they were right there in the moment. So media becomes real.
Right.
For a person right in the moment. So say for instance, you have this little, I don't know, your pinky hurts. And so you go on the internet to find out, what does it mean when your pinky hurts? And they tell you things that either you're going to be okay, and it's the first glance. It's what you see at first glance. Or this is, you might have a terrible ailment.
Right.
If that's what you see first, and especially if it's repeated, then it starts to become part of your belief system. And this starts to create an entirely different issue for you. And so this is a problem.
Sure.
I know that when we start thinking about it in terms of culture, and we start looking at what is the media actually saying, when you start getting staggering reports about, you know, a particular culture dying because of COVID, or, you know, freezing. Like we're going through a freeze in the United States right now.
Right.
And the media loves to give statistics, and they love to divide the statistics by culture, whether it's by gender, whether it's by social economic status or by ethnicity. There's always something that is divided. And this starts to create a large amount of anxiety, a large amount of concern. And then where do you turn to? What do you do about it? Especially if the media is not giving you answers of what to do. This is all what media sensationalism is. So it takes me to Dr. Claude Steele. Dr. Claude Steele talks about stereotype threat. And stereotype threat basically is when there's something that is being told about a particular group of people, and that group of people hear it, they start to expect that that's exactly how they should be. And it just feeds into it.
It does. And Regina, this has been on the minds of all of us in healthcare that work with older adults and aging families, and within long-term care particularly, is that, early on we heard in the media that older adults were of the most vulnerable people, who were most vulnerable to illness and to death.
Right.
And there are components of that message that are true, because as we age, we typically have more medical comorbidities that do make us more vulnerable to illnesses, and our immune system starts to degrade over, with those types of illnesses. However, what that did is that message that was put out there by the media not only put older adults back into the shadows, meaning that we saw a spike in ageism, the isms that are so much a part of our culture and is something that so many people deal with on a daily basis. And what we saw is there was this threat of ageism coming even more so into the foreground, where as a geropsychologist and working with other people in this field, that we've worked tirelessly over at least the last 40 years from an empirical standpoint to draw older adults out of isolation, draw them back into the community. And now we're sending messages through the media in this pandemic that they are the most vulnerable people, so go back indoors.
Right.
This has had such a devastating effect for older adults across our country, particularly those in long-term care, where now because of this perceived vulnerability through the media that has been sensationalized, that they are now facing long-term isolation, loneliness, and with that comes depression and anxiety and so many other problems that I don't think the media or anyone else had really taken into account the negative consequence that was going to have on older adults.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was going to say it may not have been the intention of the media, right? That might not have been their intent, but intention and impact are two different things.
Great point. Can you say more about that?
Absolutely. You might have all the intention in the world, but you may not have thought about the effect that it could have on another person. So that goes into that unconscious bias. So we may be unconscious about our biases. And in other words, we just feel like, we're doing the best for people in general.
Right.
But what we're actually doing when we're trying to protect, we're saying, and those who are aging are going to be okay because we're okay, or the young are okay. And that may not have been what they were thinking. They may have been thinking, this is information that's going to help and we want to protect. Let's open up our stores earlier so that the seniors can go inside. But this was affecting not just the seniors, but their families as well.
Absolutely.
I know that there has been times that I have watched my mother become more and more and more closed.
Right.
And it's very sad. And then on top of that, we have our computers that all day long, we're on there. We're spending time there. And a lot of times seniors are on watching television. So what's showing up on television? All of, you could die from this. I've fallen and I can't get up. I mean, just everything.
The messages.
Exactly.
Right.
Those messages that impact individuals, their psyche.
Absolutely.
And that becomes a major problem.
Major problem. Right. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we find balance as individuals who who need to use the media, need to get information from the media, however that resource is, or however it comes to us, whether it's through the television or, and you know what's interesting about this, a little bit of sidetrack, but the television piece. I was talking with a friend of mine recently, and we were remembering growing up where, you know, we didn't have internet, and you and I are from that cohort.
Right. Don't tell.
Right. Way to look it. But,
Right.
So, but we grew up in a cohort where you only had an amount of time to watch television.
Right.
And the news came on at a certain time.
That's right.
And if you missed it, you missed it.
Right.
And then you were moving on to the next thing.
And the snow comes, you know, the black and white, you know, we used to call it the battle of the network ants. That's what we would call it, yes.
And so our exposure to media, whatever that was, entertainment, news, it was limited and it cut off, and we didn't have the ability to record it. We had no ability to go back to it.
Right.
If we saw it and we moved on.
Right.
If we missed it, we moved on.
Right.
And the idea that it is constantly at our fingertips. Any time we want it, anytime we can't escape it. It never shuts off. It is always available to us.
That's right.
And this is always, you know, this idea of, you know, shutting off your phone, shutting off your television, shutting off your computer, has been around for as long as I think the internet has been around.
Right.
It's been an issue. But I think that even particularly in this last year with the pandemic, with the social injustices from George Floyd's death and how we were right there. And as you said, we have to find a balance of how do we kind of go back to those early days of limiting that.
It is very difficult. There's a couple of things that come to mind. You know, I start thinking about the fact, like you said, we can get information right away. So that's information overload, right? Where you can constantly get it. So where we used to get our information through a third party to say, this is what happened, and they summarize it. For instance, when I was in Desert Storm, I would watch the news that was being streamed from the U.S., and war looked even worse than what I was in on that day. And it's because they would take clips from different instances and stream them together. So now people are taking out their phones and they're showing it right then, and it shows up right away on Facebook or wherever. Unfiltered. And so people get that information right away. And so what are you supposed to do with that information? Then you have those who are watching, you know, television or what have you, and it is divided into such a way to draw your attention. They know when children are watching, so they know what kind of advertisement. They know when seniors are watching, so they know when to tell them that as well.
Right.
And so it's about being able to pick and choose. One of the pieces that I think is really important is for us to start changing the narrative. And in other words, we've taken our seniors and we've placed them in a space that devalues them. Like they have no value. We just have to take care of them. We have to just protect them. But if we turn it around and say, these are human walking libraries that can share with us information that we never lived through.
That's right.
And we need to use that information. You know, many, many years ago, we would always go to the elders to have the conversation and to get that wisdom.
Right.
When are we going to go back to that? I bet you they have more information than we really realize or even tapped into. I think it's important.
Absolutely. And, you know, in psychology, there were early psychologists looking at this very thing where we became a data-driven society.
Yes.
And we put so much emphasis on data and what do statistics tell us about certain things in order to either understand patterns of behavior or trends or project what's going to happen next. And what we've lost in the data is that individual experience that only comes from wisdom and experience and lessons learned through long lives and exposure to certain things. And we've missed that.
Absolutely.
We have really missed that in the
We
data.
have, but what is really exciting is we're in an era where natural foods and teas are coming back into play. And we have ways that we can really take care of ourselves. I'm not saying don't go to the doctors, but I am saying that you can do preventative things. You can actually encourage health within yourself by choosing, what are you going to eat? What are you going to watch? What are you going to say?
Right.
One thing I know is that the words that we hear and the words that we say impacts the way that we think.
Right.
The way that we think definitely connects to the way that we feel. Our feelings moves us right into our actions, either to withdraw or to shout out. And then from our actions comes our character. And so we have to start thinking, what is our character? I mean, who are we as a person? Are we fearful? Are we grieving? Are we nervous? Are we excited? Do we try to tell people what they should do? Question that and then reverse it. Because to change that is to change your actions. But to change your actions, you have to change the way that you feel. And the only way to change the way that you feel is to change the way that you think.
Right.
And then
changing the narrative.
And changing that narrative. So it's just this piece that we have to do. But this takes intention.
It does.
You know, Dr. Geneva Gay says intention without action is insufficient. So you've got to put the action in. Some of that action is to look for more than one source. So if you hear something or you read something, don't stop right there.
Yep.
Go and find other information, counter what you hear. Hear the complete opposite, even if you don't agree. My neighbor and I, we don't always agree. I mean, we get along very well, but we don't agree on topics. But I love having a conversation with him because he sees it so different than I do.
Absolutely.
Bring
and it's
those
through
in.
the diversity that
Yes.
we are stronger.
That's right.
That we grow. It's through the diversity of information that we get. And I really like this idea that you've brought up of researching the other side of the argument.
Right.
That you should know both sides of any issue so that you are informed and can be well-rounded in your opinions.
Right.
Because what happens is we become so myopic
Right.
that then we have our blinders on and we don't see the possibilities.
Absolutely.
As a psychologist, one of my mentors told me that you should always hold 2 or 3 hypotheses about any particular person that you're working with in therapy. Because if I hold one vision about a person and their struggle and what that means and where they are, I forget to see all the realms of possibilities that are also contributing to any number of problems. Or I also weed out all of the strengths and the creativity. And so when we don't see things with that kind of fisheye view,
Right.
then we become so rigid in our own thinking. And I think that that's where we can really get ourselves into some trouble.
Absolutely. I believe that your thinking is just a hypothesis rather than a taken for granted truth.
Right.
Because there are so many different experiences that people have that we have to look at it differently. You know, I was looking at a video by Kimberly Jones, and something she said in there really helped me. She said, instead of looking at what people are doing, find out why they're doing it. Why do people make the decisions that they do? It may be horrific to you, but we have to take it a layer deeper than that. And that's going to take going from a cultural mindset to a cultural mind shift. And that's not easy to do.
Right.
You know,
It's
when you
not.
have your cultural mindset, that comes and it's solidified through your exposure, your experiences, your beliefs, your thoughts, your values. And so then this continues to rotate and solidifies for you. And then all of a sudden you hear something different because like you had said, you know, look at other media, find other information. And so when you do, and it doesn't feel right to you, that's a rub. We call that the amygdala hijack. That's that frontal lobe where you have that fight or flight. set with that so that you can get to a place where you can hear other perspectives and have other experiences, which builds empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start to see yourself in it.
Right.
You know, we can look at these two different sides, two different thoughts, your thought and then the opposite thought. And the one question that you can ask yourself is, what is the point?
Mm.
Because possibly both sides is trying to get to the same point.
Isn't that the truth? Yes.
Yeah.
There has to be also, I think, in that a discussion around values. Because if we can get on the same page about what a shared value is.
Yes.
Such as, you know, just taking the argument of to wear a mask or not wear a mask, which
Sure.
was huge in our media,
Sure.
and was confusing about the different sources that came from.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if the shared value is safety and protection,
Right.
and maybe just simply not dying,
Right.
then if we can get on the same page around our value, then all of our actions should be in line with that value.
Absolutely.
Because what we also know, just from kind of a therapeutic standpoint, is that when our actions are congruent with our values, we lead a much more fulfilling and satisfying life.
Yes, we
When
do.
I'm doing things that are not in line with my values, for example, if my value is to be healthy, to keep my family healthy, and I'm going to a party of 25 people and not wearing a mask,
Right.
I'm not going to feel good about that at about 3 a.m. in the morning when I wake up and I'm start ruminating about what did I do and
Right.
who am I going to harm and all of those things. So when we think about it, and I think that goes back to what you said earlier about intention
Right.
and consequence.
That's right.
And that we have to, it's okay to have intention, but you've got to figure out the consequence in that too.
Absolutely. And take it even a step further. You know, you look at your shared values, but then you have to look within to be able to say, what are my fears around this?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that I believe this way or cannot see another side? Am I dealing with fear?
Mm-hmm.
We, in order to do that, we also have to be humble.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a sense of humility
Mm-hmm.
in that.
Right.
And then work on how do we now collaborate, right,
Mm-hmm.
with one another. But a lot of times people can't get to collaboration because it takes so long.
Yes.
But collaboration is a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wins. But sometimes we can only get as far as compromising.
Yeah.
When a person compromises, now I'm teaching my class from communication, but when you compromise, you give up a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and the other person possibly gives up a little bit to get to a common point.
Right.
And sometimes we have to do that, but you can't get there until you really go deep inside with yourself and have an open to learning and
Yeah.
open to discuss
Yeah.
attitude.
That's wonderful, Regina. And I think one of the triggers or the signal that I get when I have an opportunity to do that very thing that you're talking about is when I sense resistance in myself. When I
Yes.
feel the resistance, I know that that is an opportunity for change.
Right.
It's an opportunity for
Love it.
growth. Is when I feel the resistance in myself. When I feel a resistance from somebody else that I'm talking to,
Mhm.
that's an opening for
Right.
a conversation.
Right.
And we get so afraid around resistance. We get so anxious around the resistance that instead of seeing it as this opportunity, this rich area, an opening for understanding, empathy, for the other side or for our own selves, empathy around, can I have empathy for myself
Right.
and how I'm feeling resistant about this very thing, whatever that is. And that to me is like what you're saying. I look to that as a flag.
Right. Right. Dr. Gibson, you said something that I just thought was fabulous when you said a feeling of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier I had mentioned unconscious bias.
Mm.
So, that's been the big buzz. People have gone through unconscious bias trainings. But unfortunately, what they're learning is that you have it, one,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to work on controlling it. but you can't control something that is unconscious. So how do you even find it? Unless somebody points it out to you.
Right.
In some fashion, whether directly or indirectly through some type of teaching, the only thing that you have is that feeling. That is a cue and that's a clue. If you start to feel this feeling of resistance, start to question yourself.
Yeah.
Why am I feeling so uncomfortable? What else do I need to know about this?
What are the hypotheses?
Absolutely. And then you can actually talk to another person. Like we had said earlier, when you're on two opposite sides, you could ask things as simple as, help me to understand.
Right.
Or what might I be missing?
Yeah.
What do we have in common? Where do we agree? These are important pieces to start to get to the point.
Yes. And I think that there's never been a more useful time to do that, to do this kind of self-introspection, because the media is all around us and we have so much to take in that it allows for us, it almost begs us to be introspective and to do the work on ourselves so that we can be better consumers of the information that is coming at us.
Absolutely. And we can, not only for ourselves, but for our seniors as well.
Absolutely.
To be able to look into that deeper. Now, I know that my mother, for instance, she loves watching game shows. And to get her to watch something else is nearly impossible. So that's an opportunity to have conversations. So, Mom, what do you think about that commercial? Or what they said, or the report that's there? How does it make you feel?
Right.
What do you need? How can I help? Or let me make some suggestions. Or, Mom, I saw that too. Don't just think it's that way, because I remember, and then take them back to a time when you do remember their strengths, their ideas, how they got you through very difficult times. I mean, I share with my mother, I said, I remember, during the time in the 70s, the struggles that we had then, and what you used to tell us and how you kept us strong. That still applies to you today, Mom. So there are things that we can actually say.
Yes, that's a wonderful reminder. And I appreciate you pulling in kind of the conversations that you have with your family.
Oh, absolutely.
That all of you, I'm sure, out there are having with your family members as well. And just a reminder, I think, to go back to the value of expertise.
Right.
The value of expertise that comes from a lifetime of experiences and accumulated wisdom.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to the topic at hand. You have the media sensationalism. There is a space and a place for our media. It is, and it plays an important role.
Right.
But we cannot just take one space or place and question it. So really start to critically think about what that is. Now, oftentimes, many of us are concrete thinkers. And so what's in front of us is what we see, and then we act from there.
Right.
And what we have to do is train ourselves, if we haven't already, to questioning and to start to investigate and find other ways and asking other people. Yeah. What do you think? And if you think something different, sharing it with your friends and family or those who you're taking care of, I think it's important.
It is important. I'm thinking about some kind of skills, again, that we could impart to our viewers about what they can do, because we've given you a lot of, we've had a wonderful conversation about media and what this means and how we can be more culturally responsive in our approach and in our dialogues with people who have different opinions than ours.
Sure.
And I think, too, some of the skills that can be used around this topic is that it is about moderation. We've all heard that, right?
Right.
Moderation in what we eat, what we drink, what we spend, and moderation in what we see and what we take in terms of the media. So a couple of ideas is that we have to maybe limit the scope of what we're taking in.
Yes.
Know what resources you tend to get the most reliable information. And that's not, what I get and what you get are maybe very different things.
Right.
I look at the World Health Organization, I go to the CDC. There are other things that I look to, especially in my professional field, that I know are reliable sources.
Absolutely.
And so limiting the scope of that, and I think also creating a balance of exposure to the media. I've been known to take what I call a media sabbatical. When I start feeling anxious, and again, this comes from a lot of self-awareness. Notice if you're becoming irritable, if you're quick to temper, if you become so resistant to hearing what other people have to say on a topic. That is your red flag. That can be your barometer to know maybe I need to take a break.
Right.
My husband and I have had this discussion multiple times because we had a kind of a ritual every morning at the breakfast table. We'd watch, the news to kind of set the day and see what's going on. But I noticed over time we were starting to get pretty anxious around things. And so I said, all right, we gotta stop it. We gotta just let's do a sabbatical.
Yes.
1 week. No news.
I love it.
And let's just have conversation at the table. Let's talk about other things. Let's watch like HGTV or
Right.
the Animal Planet, something that
That's
is
right.
benign. And,
Right.
I will tell you, I know several older adults, my mother included, who've gone back to watching old movies.
Oh, absolutely.
Or Gunsmoke, for example. Gunsmoke is a favorite. And I think that's because our frontal lobes need a break.
Right.
We need to give ourselves a break from always intellectualizing and thinking about these important yet very heavy topics in our world right now. So giving ourselves a break to watch things that are kind of mindless, kind of enjoyable. And Gunsmoke is interesting because people are going back to older programs that are kind of grounded in morals, in teachings of what values are. And that brings us back to the basics,
Absolutely.
which can be so important and grounding in and of itself during this kind of tumultuous time.
I like what you said because I like watching Little House on the Prairie.
Oh, gosh, me too.
Michael Landon, I'm just saying, But they went through some struggles.
They did.
And it's a neat way to watch how did they maneuver and get through that on a prairie, let alone.
Exactly.
And how can I apply that to my life today? So I'm constantly looking for those answers. Yeah. And a lot of times we can find that in watching these movies from back to yesteryear.
Yes.
So I love that you brought that. That was fantastic.
Great. Well, I think we have really exhausted this topic, although we could go on and on.
Of course
I know
we could.
But again, we want to encourage all of you out there listening to take this information, as you have, I hope, with all these podcasts, take this information and continue the dialogue.
Yes.
Turn the TV off for a few minutes and actually have a discussion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that it's really important. Be mindful of who you're working with and their needs, their experiences, their cultural backgrounds, to make that connection, building those relationships of mutual respect. And the outcome will be tremendous.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your time. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you.